Hi, my name is Christina Doe, and I'm the facilities manager of the Rosenbach. I am here today to read to you from James Joyce's Ulysses, episode 16, Eumaeus. Mr. Bloom and Stephen entered into the cabman's shelter, an unpretentious wooden structure where, prior to then, he had rarely, if ever, had been before. The former, having previously whispered to the latter a few hints, anent the keeper of it, said to be the once famous Skin the Goat Fitzharris, the Invincible, though he could not vouch for the actual fact, which quite possibly there was not one vestige of truth in. A few moments later, saw our two noctambules safely seated in a discreet corner, only to be greeted by stares from the decidedly miscellaneous collection of waifs and strays and other nondescript specimens of the genus Homo. Already they're engaged in eating and drinking, diversified by conversation, for whom they've seemingly formed an object of marked curiosity. Now, touching a cup of coffee, Mr. Bloom ventured to plausibly suggest, to break the ice, "It occurs to me you ought to sample in the shape of solid food, say a roll of some description." Accordingly, his first act was with characteristic sang-froid to order these commodities quietly. The hoi polloi of the Jarvies or stevedores, or whatever they were after cursory examination, turned their eyes, apparently dissatisfied, away, though one red-bearded, bibulous individual, portion of whose hair was grayish, a sailor probably, still stared for some appreciable time before transferring his rapt attention to the floor. Mr. Bloom, availing himself of the right of free speech, he having just a bowing acquaintance with the language in dispute, though to be sure, rather in a quandary over voyo, remarked to his protege in an audible tone of voice, apropos the battle royale in the street, which was still raging fast and furious. "A beautiful language. I mean for singing purposes. Why not write your poetry in that language? Bella potrea, it's so melodious and full. Bella donna, voglio." Stephen, who was trying his dead best to yawn if he could, suffering from lassitude generally, replied, "To fill the ear of a cow elephant." They were haggling over money. "Is that so?" Mr. Bloom asked. Of course, he subjoined pensively at the inward reflection of there being more languages to start with than there were absolutely necessary. It may be only the southern glamour that surrounds it. The keeper of the shelter, in the middle of this tete-a-tete, put a boiling swimming cup of a choice concoction labeled coffee on the table, and a rather antediluvian specimen of a bun, or so it seemed. After which he beat a retreat to his counter, Mr. Bloom determining to have a good square look at him later on, so as not to appear to, for which reason he encouraged Stephen to proceed with his eyes, while he did the honors by surreptitiously pushing a cup of what was temporarily supposed to be called coffee gradually nearer him. "Sounds are impostors," Stephen said after a pause of some little time. "Like names. Cicero, Pottermore, Napoleon, Mr. Goodbody, Jesus, Mr. Doyle. Shakespeare's were as common as Murphy's. What's in a name?" "Yes, to be sure," Mr. Bloom unaffectedly concurred. "Of course, our name was changed too," he added, pushing the so-called roll across. The red-bearded sailor, who had his weathered eye on the newcomers, boarded Stephen, whom he had singled out for attention in particular, squarely by asking, "And what might your name be?" Just in the nick of time, Mr. Bloom touched his companion's boot, but Stephen, apparently disregarding the warm pressure from an unexpected quarter, answered, "Daedalus." The sailor stared at him heavily from a pair of drowsy, baggy eyes, rather bunged up from excessive use of booze, preferably good old Hollands and water. "You know Simon Daedalus?" he asked at length. "I've heard of him," Stephen said. Mr. Bloom was all at sea for a moment, seeing the others evidently eavesdropping too. "He's Irish," the seaman boldly affirmed, staring still in much the same way and nodding. "All Irish." "All too Irish," Stephen rejoined. As for Mr. Bloom, he could neither make head or tail of the whole business, and he was just asking himself what possible connection when the sailor, of his own accord, turned to the other occupants of the shelter with the remark, "I seen him shoot 2 eggs off 2 bottles at 50 yards over his shoulder. The left hand dead shot." Though he was slightly hampered by an occasional stammer, and his gestures being also clumsy as it was, still he did his best to explain. "Bottles out there, say 50 yards measured. Eggs on the bottle. Cocks his gun over his shoulder. Aims." He turned his body half round, shut up his right eye completely. Then he screwed his features up some way sideways and glared out into the night with an unprepossessing cast of countenance. "Boom!" he then shouted once. The entire audience waited, anticipating an additional detonation, there being still a further egg. "Boom!" he shouted twice. Egg 2 evidently demolished, he nodded and winked, adding bloodthirstily, "Buffalo Bill shoots to kill, never miss nor he never will." A silence ensued until Mr. Bloom, for agreeableness' sake, just felt like asking him whether it was for a marksmanship competition, like the Beasley. "Beg pardon?" the sailor said. "Long ago?" Mr. Bloom pursued without flinching a hair's breadth. "Why," the sailor replied, relaxing to a certain extent under the magic influence of diamond-cut diamond, "it might be a matter of 10 years. He toured the wide world with Hengler's Royal Circus. I seen him do that in Stockholm." "Curious coincidence," Mr. Bloom confided to Stephen unobtrusively. "Murphy's my name," the sailor continued. "D.B. Murphy of Carrigallo. Know where that is?" "Queenstown Harbor," Stephen replied. "That's right," the sailor said. "Fort Camden and Fort Carlisle. That's where I hails from. I belongs there. That's where I hails from. My little woman's down there. She's waiting for me, I know. For England, home and beauty. She's my own true wife. I haven't seen her for 7 years now, sailing about. Happy Bloomsday from the Rosenbach."